I am going to tell you about my marriage. I want you to understand what it was before I tell you what it became, because the two things are not even close to the same story. My name is Daniel Mercer, 34 years old, senior product director at a mid-sized tech firm in a city that works hard and sleeps badly. I am not a dramatic man. I plan things carefully. I weigh decisions the way an engineer weighs load-bearing structures, with patience and with respect for what happens when you get it wrong. That is who I was. That is who I still am on the other side of this. Layla came into my life at a rooftop party neither of us particularly wanted to attend. I was 26, she was 24. She was sharp-boned and dark-eyed, and she argued with someone about logistics software for 40 minutes in one, and I watched the whole thing from across the room and thought, there it is. That's the one. I was right about that part. I want to be honest about that, even now, even after everything. I was right that she was extraordinary. I was wrong about what that meant for us in the end. We built 8 years together from the raw materials of two working people who didn't have money but had time and stubbornness and enough shared vision to fill a house. Which is exactly what we did. The house came third, after the apartment, after the loft, a 1940s two-story in a neighborhood that was still deciding what it wanted to be. We renovated it ourselves over the course of 3 years. Room by room, weekend by weekend. I tiled the bathroom floor wrong the first time and had to pull it all up. Layla replastered the dining room wall 3 times before she got the texture right. We learned things we hadn't intended to learn. We got good at things neither of us had been good at before. That was the marriage in miniature, the willingness to do the hard version because the result would be ours. The kitchen table is the thing I come back to when I try to describe what we were. We found it at an estate sale on a Saturday morning in March. A heavy oak farm table, long and scarred and solid, the kind of thing that has absorbed 50 years of use and still doesn't apologize for itself. We paid $60 for it, and then discovered, too late, that it weighed roughly the same as a small automobile. The apartment we were living in at the time was on the 3rd floor of a building with a staircase designed by someone who hated furniture. We argued the entire way up. I was sweating through my shirt. Layla was cursing in 2 languages. We had to stop on the second landing for 4 full minutes because neither of us could find the leverage, and we were laughing too hard to use what we had. We set it down finally in the kitchen and stood there catching our breath, and Layla put her hand flat on the surface of it, just rested her palm on the wood and said, "This is going to outlive us." And I believed her. We didn't have children by deliberate and mutual agreement. Not because we didn't like them, but because we liked our life the way it was, lean, portable, organized around our own rhythms. We traveled in the shoulder seasons when prices dropped and crowds thinned. We kept a shared document, genuinely, an actual color-coded spreadsheet of every trip we wanted to take in the next 5 years. On weekend nights when there was nothing pressing, we'd open that spreadsheet with a bottle of wine and plan things we might never do, just for the pleasure of the architecture. Portugal in October. A road trip through the Basque Country. A week on the Oregon coast in the off-season, nothing booked in advance, just driving. We never took the Oregon trip. I think about that sometimes. The shorthand you develop with someone after 8 years of close proximity is its own kind of language. A look across a dinner party that meant let's leave soon. The specific way she'd set her coffee cup down when she was about to say something I wasn't going to like. The way I could walk into a room where she was reading and know from the angle of her shoulders whether she wanted company or quiet. I knew her the way you know a place you've lived in long enough that your body moves through it without thinking. I knew which floorboards creaked. I knew where the light fell wrong. I knew every room. Or I thought I did. I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand the weight of what I am about to describe. Not the events, anyone can list events. I need you to understand what was sitting on the table when the game began. The kitchen table we carried up 3 flights. The back porch we built from a YouTube video on a humid August weekend, arguing about joists, finishing it in the dark with a flashlight and 2 beers. The spreadsheets, the shorthand. The 8 years of accumulated specificity that constitutes a life shared rather than merely lived in proximity. I am telling you this story from the other side of something. The man who lived this out. Ife trusted completely, and that trust, I now understand, was not the same thing as being safe. Q3 consumed me. That is not an excuse, I want to be clear about that. I'm not building a defense here because what happened to me did not happen because I worked too hard. It happened because someone made a choice. But the context matters, so I will give it to you plainly. We were 3 weeks from a major product launch. I was carrying 14 direct dependencies, and I had been honest with Layla about what the next 6 weeks were going to look like. After the launch, I told her on a Sunday evening in late September, 6 weeks, and then I'm going to make it up to you properly wherever you want to go. She was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, our table, with her wine glass and her laptop, and she looked up at me and smiled and said she understood. She said she was proud of me. She squeezed my hand across the table. I believed her. I should not have believed her, but I did, because I was a man who had built 8 years of trust with someone, and I had not yet learned to look for the architecture of a lie inside the face of someone I loved. The Friday night in October is exact in my memory, the way certain things are exact when they matter enough. It was cool outside, and the kitchen smelled like whatever she'd made for dinner. I couldn't eat much. I was thinking about a deployment issue, and she was already sitting at the table when I came downstairs. Not doing anything, not on her phone, just sitting. And she had the look on her face of a woman who has rehearsed what she is about to say, and rehearsed it enough that she is now waiting for the thing she rehearsed to start. I recognized the setup immediately. I'm not proud of missing the content while reading the form, but I saw the structure before the first word came out. She had prepared this. The architecture was visible. She started with loneliness, which was fair, because I had been largely absent for 2 months and she was not wrong to feel it. She moved through that carefully, not weaponizing it, or not yet, and then she turned the corner into something else, into a language about desire and feeling unseen that was still in the register of a marriage conversation, still in the territory of something fixable. And then she said his name. Marcus, her division head. 38 years old, recently divorced, magnetic. That was the word she used. And I noted it. The way you note the exact word someone chooses when they're trying to package something difficult. She said she had feelings she didn't want to act on dishonestly. She said she wanted to give me a choice, rather than make one behind my back. She said she was asking for a hall pass, one weekend. A work retreat in Scottsdale already scheduled, already booked. She framed it as transparency, as a gift of honesty, as proof of how much she respected me and our marriage, that she was here at this table asking rather than simply doing. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment because I think you expect something cinematic, a crack, a collapse, something that looks like what breaking feels like from the outside. It wasn't that. It was quieter and more specific than that. It was the sensation of a gear changing, deep in the mechanism of whatever I had understood our marriage to be, not breaking, shifting. The whole structure rearranging itself around a new understanding that arrived fully formed, without warning, in the time it took her to finish the sentence that contained Marcus's name. I understood before she finished speaking exactly what had already happened. The feelings she didn't want to act on dishonestly had already been acted on. The hall pass was not a request. It was retroactive administration. She was asking permission for something that was no longer in the future, and she was asking with the genuine belief that this made her a good person, that the asking was the virtue. I let her finish completely, every word. I did not move. I did not interrupt. I sat across from her at the table. We had carried up 3 flights of stairs together, and I let the entire speech land, and I looked at her face, and I made a decision. Not a reactive decision, a deliberate one, the kind I make well. I said very quietly, "Okay." She lit up. There is no other word for it. The tension drained from her shoulders like something released, and her eyes went bright, and she was across the kitchen before I fully processed that she had moved, arms around me, her face in my neck, telling me I was the most understanding man she had ever known. She held on for a long moment. Then she pulled back, kissed me once on the jaw, and said she needed to call her sister. I listened to her footsteps on the stairs. I listened to her voice through the ceiling, bright, unburdened, the way someone sounds when they have just been handed something they wanted. I stood at the kitchen counter for a long Tim. I poured the rest of the wine into the sink. I rinsed the glass and set it on the drying rack. Then I picked up my phone, walked out the front door into the cool October night, and called Raymond Cruz. Raymond was the kind of man you called when you needed something done correctly. I had used him once before on a workplace fraud case at my company, an embezzlement situation that needed documentation before it could become a legal situation. He was quiet, precise, and entirely without theater. I knew what he cost. I knew what he delivered. That night I needed both. She thought I had given her something. I had actually started something. There is a difference between those two things, and she would not understand it for another 8 days. I explained the situation to Raymond in the way I explain everything, chronologically, without editorializing, with the specific facts given in the order they became relevant. His name, her name, the hotel in Scottsdale, the dates of the retreat. Marcus Hale, I spelled the last name twice, because Raymond was the kind of man who appreciated precision, and I was the kind of man who provided it. I told him what I needed. Not suspicion, not implication, not the kind of documentation that a competent defense attorney could stand up in a room and argue around. I needed evidence. Time-stamped, irrefutable, clean. The kind of thing that closes conversations rather than opening them. He said he understood. He said he would handle it. I went back inside. Layla was still on the phone with her sister upstairs. I could hear her laughing, a specific laugh, the one she used when something had gone better than she expected. I poured a glass of water, stood at the sink for a while, and then went to bed. I slept 5 hours. That surprised me later. At the time, I simply needed to sleep. The next morning was Saturday. I called Sarah Ackhaffer at 9. She was a family law attorney with 19 years of practice. I had met her twice through a mutual friend, a woman named Bate who had gone through her own divorce 4 years ago and spoken of Sarah in the specific, grateful terms that people use for someone who helped them survive something. I had kept Sarah's number in my phone without examining why. That morning, I found out why. I told her the situation. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she asked 3 clarifying questions. Then she asked if I wanted papers filed immediately upon receipt of documentation from the investigator. I told her no. I wanted them served the night Layla came home from Scottsdale, before she had even unpacked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, I think, but recalibrating. She asked if I was certain. I told her I was. She said she would begin drafting everything immediately. The days between were strange in the way that ordinary things become strange when you are carrying a fact that no one else in the room can see. Layla was luminous. She shopped for the trip the way someone shops when they are excited, not efficiently, but wanderingly, coming home with things and showing them to me. The green dress. A new pair of sandals. The birthday perfume I had given her 18 months ago, the bottle she'd been saving, brought out now and set on the bathroom counter. I watched all of it. I ate dinner across from her every night that week, and I let myself feel nothing yet because the time for feeling it had not arrived. What I felt instead was the specific clarity of a man who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. There is a kind of peace in that. I am not sure it is a healthy kind of peace, but it is real. Thursday morning, she kissed me at the front door. She held my face in both hands for a moment, looking at me, and told me she loved me. I told her I loved her too. Both things were true. That is the part people don't understand about betrayal. The love does not vanish on the night of the conversation. It sits alongside the other thing, and for a while the two things occupy the same space, and you have to wait for one of them to resolve. I watched the Uber pull away from the curb. I went back inside. The house was very quiet. I sat in the kitchen for a while at the table, and then I had work to do, and I did it. Saturday evening, I was in my truck in a hardware store parking lot. I'd gone for paint. For the back porch project I kept postponing. When my phone buzzed with a notification from the secure file-sharing app I had set up with Raymond. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off, and I opened the folder. It contained what Raymond had promised. Time-stamped, documented, irrefutable. Hotel records, photographs taken in public spaces, and 40 seconds of footage. I watched the 40 seconds. I closed the phone. I sat in that parking lot until the sky went completely dark and the lot's overhead lights flickered on, one by one, until I was sitting in a yellow pool of artificial light in an empty row. And I was very still, and I let myself understand what I had just seen. There are things you can prepare for intellectually and still not be entirely prepared for. The footage was one of them. The documentation of what I had suspected, that was not the part that landed hard. I had already known. What I had not known or had not let myself know was the other thing on that footage. A specific thing Layla said in front of Marcus in that hotel room about me. It was said casually, the way you say something when you don't think anyone is keeping score. I did not quote it to myself there in the parking lot. I simply understood it. And it was the thing that removed my last hesitation about the second decision. The one I had been considering since Tuesday night but hadn't committed to until that moment, sitting alone in the dark with the parking lot lights humming overhead. I forwarded the complete folder to Sarah Ockhaffer. Then I drove to a diner on the edge of town and opened a new document on my phone and began to write. The diner was open late and mostly empty at that hour. A woman named Deb brought me coffee without being asked. I told her thank you. She left me alone, which was what I needed. I want to be honest with you here about what that hour in the booth contained, because I could skip over it and give you only the mechanics of what I did next, and the mechanics are more satisfying and easier to read. But this story is true, or as true as I know how to make it, and the truth includes that hour. I sat there and I let myself think about her. Not about the footage, not about Marcus, not about the next 48 hours. I thought about the woman I had married. The one who argued about logistics software at a rooftop party and won. The one whose hand I had watched rest flat on the surface of a table, pronouncing it permanent. I gave myself 1 hour, not as a ritual, not as a decision I made, but because that was how long it took to sit with the weight of what I had actually lost. Not the marriage as it had been in the last year, or the last 2 years, or whenever the thing I thought we were had become the thing it turned out to be. But the marriage as I had understood it. The version I had built in my head and my hands and my habits over 8 years. I let myself feel it. I did not perform stoicism for an empty diner booth. I acknowledged privately and completely that the loss was real, that it had a specific gravity, that I had loved this woman in ways that were not diminished by the fact of what she had done, and that the love and the betrayal were both real and neither one canceled the other out. And then I set it down. I ordered a second coffee I did not drink, and I did what I had come to do. Sarah already had Raymond's complete documentation package. I had forwarded it from the hardware store parking lot before driving here. The photographs, the hotel records, the timestamps, the 40 seconds of footage. Everything she needed was already in her hands. Now I opened the document I had begun on my phone. The letter was brief. That was the first discipline I imposed on it, brevity. I addressed it to the board chair of Layla's company, whose name I had found on LinkedIn in 30 seconds, because that information is simply available to anyone who looks. The board chair's name and professional title went at the top. The letter ran 4 paragraphs. It contained no emotional language. It did not describe my feelings about what I had discovered, or about my marriage, or about the man named Marcus Hale who served as Layla's division head. It disclosed the documentation. It provided the timestamps. It noted, factually, that the footage in question depicted a senior operations manager and her direct supervisor in a hotel room during a company-sponsored retreat, and that the footage had been obtained by a licensed private investigator and would be available in its entirety upon request. It did not argue. It did not threaten. It simply described what had happened, attached what proved it, and trusted the reader to understand the implications. I will tell you now what Layla said on that footage. I have waited 3 chapters to say it, not because I am performing suspense for its own sake, but because I needed you to understand everything else first. The table, the spreadsheets, the porch, the trust, before those words could land the way they landed for me. She was lying on the hotel bed, talking to Marcus, and she said this, casually, with the lightness of someone sharing a mild opinion. He thinks I'm at a conference because he still thinks I'm the kind of person who would feel bad about it. He's been managing me for 8 years. He just doesn't know that's what he's doing. That was it. That was the sentence. Said with a small laugh, and Marcus laughed too, and then the conversation moved on. It cost her nothing to say. She said it the way you say something about a habit someone has, something mild. Lie amusing, something that doesn't require examination. It told me everything I needed to know, not just that the marriage was over, but that it had been over for some time before I was informed. The hall pass request had not been the beginning of something. It had been the administration of something already finished. I had not been her husband in the full sense of the word for a long time. I had been managed. I sent the letter. From that diner booth on that Saturday night before Layla had landed back home. Then I drove home and set the table for dinner. I made pasta, which is what I make when I am not thinking about what to make. I opened a bottle of wine and poured one glass and let it breathe. I put on something quiet in the background, not music exactly, just sound, and I waited. She arrived Sunday evening on an incoming tide of warmth. She was glowing in the specific way of someone returning from something that had fed something in them. She dropped her bag at the door and hugged me hard and said she would never be able to fully explain what this weekend had meant to her. She said she felt alive again. She said she thought this was going to be good for us, that she had so much more to give now. She said the word us several times. I noted it. We ate dinner. She talked through most of it. I refilled her wine. I listened. I asked a few questions, the kind that kept her talking, and she talked, and the dinner was pleasant, and the house felt almost normal, and the table between us held the weight of everything I wasn't saying without visibly bending. We were still sitting there when the knock came at the front door. She looked up at me with mild curiosity. "You expecting someone?" I set my fork down. "No," I answered. "What?" She was already pushing her chair back when the second knock came. I watched her cross the kitchen into the hallway, watched her hand find the door handle with the easy confidence of a woman inside her own life. And I watched the half-second that happened when she opened the door. The pause before understanding arrives, when the face is still organized around the expectation of something ordinary. She stood there holding the envelope for several seconds before she came back to the kitchen table. She set it down between us. She looked at it, and then at me, and her face was doing something complicated that I recognized as the process of revising a story in real time. "What is this?" she asked, her voice still steady, still expecting an ordinary answer. "Divorce papers," I said. The color left her face in a clean, visible wave. And then, because she was a smart woman, she had always been a smart woman, she went immediately to the only argument she had. "You gave me a hall pass," she said. Her voice was level, but I could hear the effort that required. "Daniel, you said yes, you agreed." I let the sentence settle before I spoke. "I said yes," I told her, and that yes was not consent, it was a starting point. She stared at me. "The moment you asked me," I continued, "I understood that the marriage was already over. I said yes because I needed documentation to end it cleanly. A verbal agreement to a hall pass is not a signed waiver of marital rights." Sarah explained that to me on the first phone call. There was a silence that had actual texture, the kind that comes when someone is trying to find a foothold on a surface that has no purchase. Then Layla's face moved through something that looked, briefly, like grief, and then anger arrived and replaced it. "You set me up," she said. Her voice had heat in it now. "You let me go. You planned this. This is entrapment, Daniel. You can't." "I can," I said. "I did, and nothing I did was illegal, Layla. I gave a licensed private investigator a name and a hotel and a date. Everything that happened after that, you did yourself." She went still. I told her about Raymond. Quietly, factually, the way you explain something that is simply true. I told her he had been in Scottsdale. I told her about the hotel records, the photographs, the timestamps. I watched her face change color as I spoke, going white again, then past white to something more complicated. And then I told her about the footage. "Daniel," she started, her voice dropping to something quieter, something almost pleading. 40 seconds, I said. Raymond got 40 seconds of footage from inside the hotel room. Clear audio, clear visual, time-stamped. "You didn't the board chair," she stopped mid-sentence. She was doing math. I could see it moving across her face. "I sent it Saturday night," I said. "From a diner booth while you were still in Scottsdale, before you even landed Sunday." She made a sound that wasn't a word. Her hands dropped flat onto the table, our table, the one we'd carried up 3 flights, the one she had put her palm on once and said would outlive us both, and she stared at them, not at me. "There's one more thing," I said. She looked up slowly. "I quo." Ted her, directly, exactly, without introduction or framing, the same way she had said it, casually, as if it cost nothing. He thinks I'm at a conference because he still thinks I'm the kind of person who would feel bad about it. He's been managing me for 8 years. He just doesn't know that's what he's doing. The silence that followed was of a different kind than the earlier ones. This one had weight. It wasn't the silence of someone calculating. It was the silence of someone who has heard themselves played back and found no version of the words that doesn't mean exactly what they meant. She tried, I will give her that. She opened her mouth twice. The second time she said quietly, almost to herself, "That's not, I didn't mean." I waited. She stopped. "I didn't build anything in this conversation," I told her. "You did, I just paid attention." Something moved across her face that I almost could not look at, not because it was ugly, but because it was real and it was grief. And for a moment she was the woman at the rooftop party, the one who argued and won, the one whose hand I had watched rest on old oak, and I did not move toward it. I couldn't. The distance between who she had been and what she had said in that hotel room was not a distance I knew how to cross. I told her she would want to make calls tonight, to her board, to her attorney, to whoever she was staying with. I told her my name was on the deed and hers was not. I told her Sarah's firm had already been in touch with the house documentation and she would want her own attorney as quickly as possible because Sarah was very good and did not leave much space to work in. She got her coat from the hook by the door. She got her purse from the kitchen counter. No bag packed, nothing from the bedroom. The door opened, and there was a moment, just the length of a breath, where she stood in the frame and did not turn around, and I watched that moment, and then the door clicked shut. The house was very quiet. I cleared the table. I carried the dishes to the sink and washed them by hand in the order I always wash them, glasses first, then plates, then the pan. I dried them and put them where they lived. I wiped down the counter. I turned off the kitchen light. I went upstairs and I got into bed and I lay there in the dark, and I looked at the inside of my left wrist, the small letters of her name, tattooed there in my own handwriting years ago, during a weekend in New Orleans when we were 29 and convinced of everything. I looked at it for a long time. And then I turned off the light. I want you to know I slept. Marcus Hale was terminated Monday morning. Companies move quickly and quietly when the documentation is airtight and the liability is clear. There is no version of this story where a division head survives footage of himself in a hotel room with a direct report on a company-sponsored retreat, not once the board chair has seen the timestamps and run the calculations about exposure. He was gone before noon. His nameplate, his parking space, his company email. Efficient and permanent, the way organizations protect themselves when they stop protecting people. Layla was placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. I noted this without satisfaction. It was simply what happened, the way dominoes fall when you have set them in the correct order with the correct spacing. The math was not complicated. Before the week was out, she resigned. I understand someone advised her that the resignation was strategically cleaner than waiting for the review's conclusion. It was the right call. I would have made the same one. That is the thing about Layla that has never changed. She is operationally intelligent, even under pressure. The intelligence just didn't run in the direction of our marriage. I have heard from mutual friends that her name carries a specific weight now in certain professional rooms. Not the kind anyone chooses. The industry we worked in was not a large one, and documentation, once it exists, does not disappear because you prefer it to. I do not comment on this beyond the fact of it. It is not mine to manage. The divorce was finalized in 7 months. Layla's attorney, she found a good one, which I expected, argued that the hall pass constituted binding consent, that I had agreed to the arrangement and therefore could not claim injury from it. Sarah Ackhaffer dismantled that argument in 4 pages. 4 pages, clean and specific, and without a single sentence that did not do work. The verbal agreement was not documented, was not witnessed, was not presented as a legal instrument at the time it was offered, and was, Sarah argued, with the particular precision of someone who has done this for 19 years, a response to a coercive request made by a spouse who had already begun an affair. The judge was not sympathetic to the counterargument. Layla's attorney did not look surprised when the ruling came owned. I kept the house. The shared savings were divided. adjusted for equity per the settlement, which was fair in the clean way that financial math is fair when the documentation is complete, and neither party has much ground to argue from. I was 34 years old and solvent and free, in the specific, undecorated sense of the word. I eat dinner when I want to. I sleep without difficulty. I have rebuilt my schedule around myself, not as a statement, not as a performance of recovery, but in the quiet, practical way of a person who no longer has to negotiate every small decision with another person's preferences. It is strange at first. Then it is simply the shape of your life. I started the back porch project I had been postponing for 2 years. Saturday mornings early before it gets warm. I work from the original plans we drew up together, her handwriting still in the margins in a few places, measurements she had written down during one of our late-night planning sessions. I have not redrawn those pages. The measurements are still correct. The house is quieter than it used to be. I have decided I do not mind quiet. The tattoo is still there. The small letters on the inside of my left wrist, her name in my handwriting, done in New Orleans when we were 29 and certain of things. I have looked at it many times since the night the door clicked shut. I have been waiting to feel something about it. What I feel instead is nothing in particular, not absence, not grief, not the specific hot thing that used to move through me when I thought about what she said in that hotel room. Just the observation of letters that spell a name that used to mean something. That I have come to understand is the information, not the anger I carried briefly, not the satisfaction I permitted myself even more briefly. The information is the nothing. The information is that I looked at something, looked at it completely, without flinching, without revising it into something easier, and the looking resolved it. I am going to have it covered, not because it hurts to see. It does not hurt. That is precisely why. There is no sensible reason to carry forward what no longer means anything. The table will outlive us as she predicted. It is still there, still solid, still bearing weight without apology. The porch is coming along. The house is mine. That is my last thought on the matter. Not anger, not grief, not triumph. Just the clean, functional logic of a man who looked at something, understood it fully, and decided it had run its course.